Welcome to our class on Chassidus. This week we're learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse of the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Nosoi Yisroish. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parshas Nosoi, Yud Bei Sivan, the 12th day of the month of Sivan in the year Tavshin Mem Ches, exactly 30 years ago. So the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse where it says, Nosoi Yisroish Bnei Gershon Gam Heim. You should elevate the head of the family of Gershon, Gam Heim, also them. So the Alter Rebbe, in the famous classical Sefer Likutei Torah, in the beginning of the Torah portion of Nosei Yisroish, which we call the Likutei Torah, the Chassidic Torah portion of the week, so he asks a very simple question. Why does it say Gam Heim, also them? It should just tell us, elevate the head. What does it mean, also them? Also, he asks, why, when it comes to Merari, doesn't it say you should elevate their head as well? Why only by Gershon? And it also says, again, Gam Heim, also them. So he explains as follows, with an introduction. We have to understand the whole idea and the purpose of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and it's traveling in the desert. In other words, the Mishkan that was in the desert. So the Mishkan was traveling with the Jewish people. We're on the way to the destiny, the goal, to go to the land of Israel. And as it's called, Eretz Neisheves, a land that we dwell in. You don't dwell and live in the desert, you travel in the desert. So we're traveling in the Mishkan, with the Mishkan in the desert, to come to the Eretz Neisheves, which is the land of Israel. Why do we have to understand this? Very simple. Because even though it's a story of the past, this exactly story of the past, the technical story, the physical story of the past, we also have this spiritual avodah, which we're going to learn what the spiritual avodah is, the spiritual work is, we also have today. Why? Because the fact is, we know that even though there was a Mishkan of the past, but the Mishkan, the dwelling place of Hashem, exists within every single one of us. As the verse says clearly, V'shachanti b'soicham, Hashem says, I'll dwell amongst them. It doesn't say b'soichoi, specifically singular into the tabernacle, but it says plural, b'soicham, in them. What does that mean within them? So we know it means b'soich kol echad ve'echad b'Yisrael. That v'shachanti, Hashem dwells within each and every one of us. So just like then, the tabernacle was a means to take us through the desert so we should get to the land of Israel. The same thing also. The V'shachanti, that Hashem is dwelling within us. While we are here now in Galus, it's a preparation for our destination. What's our destination? The tremendous revelation that's going to take place la'asad lava in the future when Mashiach comes. Because what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? When Mashiach comes, all the components that are not with the will of Hashem is going to totally be naught and nullified. As the verse says clearly, Vesaruach Hatuma, in reference to Mashiach comes, the evil, the impure spirit, Avim min haaretz, Hashem is going to take away from the earth. And what's going to happen then is, the impure spirit's going to go away. That's taking away the negative. But we're not going to be in a neutral zone. But the verse continues, the verse says, the ach toiv v'chesed. It's going to be only toiv, good, v'chesed, and kindness for everybody. So if that's the case, if there's not going to be anything impure, and it's going to be only good and kindness, what are we going to be doing then when Mashiach comes? So the Rebbe says clearly, what's going to be our avodah, what's going to be our spiritual service when Mashiach comes? It's going to be ba'aliyot. And what kind of aliyot? What kind of elevations? Elevations in holiness. So in other words, there's not going to be any impurity. There's only going to be good and kindness, but we're going to be busy with higher levels of holiness and kindness and goodness and peace and happiness. Now, so what happened in the desert was, we were going to the land of Israel. We're going to the holy place where Hashem is revealed. So the preparation for going to the land of Israel was we had to go into the desert. What was the purpose of going into the desert? To subdue anything which is le'umazeh, anything which is counter to godliness. And by getting rid of the godliness, we prepare for coming into the land of Israel where everything's being beautiful and everything is godly. Why is that? Because we all know, the Rebbe brings down and he says that the midbar, the desert, is the source of, I'll say it in Hebrew, Yenika Sachitzonium, that anything external, anything negative is all leaks out and leaches out from the spiritual desert. Like, for example, the Rebbe quotes the verse, and it says, what happened in the desert? What was in the desert? There was a nachash, saraf, v'akrev, snakes, scorpions, fire, etc. And then it says, v'tzimoin, there was a tremendous thirst, because there's no water. So what does that mean practically? Obviously, practically, we know what it means. What does it mean spiritually? Nachash, Saraf, V'Yakrev, those three, refers to, on a spiritual level, Gimel, Klipo, Tatmeot. The three impure Klipo that cannot be elevated. That was obviously in the desert. And the Tzimoin, the thirst, where there was no water, is actually the fourth Klipo, which is obviously even worse. Now, so that's the spiritual desert. So the desert resembles the three klipot, nachashar v'akrev. The fourth klipa, tzimoin, a thirst where there's no water. And when the Jewish people went in the desert and they had the Mishkan, the goal was to nullify anything which is inappropriate, which is not godly, and which is not godliness. To nullify the three impure klipot and even the fourth klipa. Like it says in the oral law, which is basically, we know the oral law is an explanation of the written law, because the Torah was given main points, the written law, and the oral law has all the details. And what does it say in Torah Shebal Peh? What does it say in the oral law? That the ananim, the clouds that accompany the Jewish people in the desert, what did the clouds do? They would destroy all the negative forces, all the mazikim, anybody that wanted to harm the Jewish people, the clouds destroyed it. In other words, before the Mishkan was built, how did we get rid of all the negativity? Hashem protected us with the clouds of glory. And the clouds of glory destroyed and obliterated all the negativity. What happened once the Mishkan was built? Then we traveled as well. But once the Mishkan was built, then we had the ark that was in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. As we know, where it says, when we take out the Torah, we say, Vayihi ben soya ha'aron. When the ark would travel, what would happen? V'yafutzu oivecha. All our enemies would disappear. The Torah has the power to get rid of all the enemies, obviously after the Mishkan was built. Before that, it was done by the clouds of glory. Now, that was in the desert. And the desert prepared us to go into the land of Israel. But the same idea, by getting rid of the klipot, getting rid of the negative forces, and bringing in Torah into our life, we prepare the world by getting rid of the klipot, by getting rid of the negative forces for the asad lavai, for Mashiach comes, and we're not going to have any negative forces. We're only going to have positive forces, and we're going to keep on growing higher and higher in a spiritual level. And as Rebbe says, we know what it says in the prophets, that what's going to happen, la'asad lavoi, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So Rebbe brings a powerful verse from the prophet Isaiah, and he says as follows: V'lo yikanef oid meirecha, v'hayu einecha royos es meirecha. We know there's a Hashem on the world, there's a God in the world, there's a mentor, there's a teacher, there's a guide that runs everything, created the world, maintains the world. So unfortunately in Galus, there's yikanef. We don't see Meirecha, our guide and our teacher. But when Mashiach comes, says, V'lo yikanef oid meirecha, that your teacher's not going to be, so to speak, hidden. But on the contrary, V'hayu einecha, we're going to see in a revealed way our teacher, our mentor, because godliness is going to be revealed in a beautiful way. And as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, black and white, simple English, what's going to be Mashiach comes? There's going to be Gili Elikus, mamish, literally. God is going to be revealed in a real way. Instead of seeing physical things, materialistic things, obviously for sure not the klipot and negativity, but we're going to see God and godliness in everything. Up to the point of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, not only are we going to see Hashem revealed, we're going to see the revelation of the essence of Hashem himself. That's what Mashiach is going to be all about. We're going to see, feel, and live with Hashem himself. And as the Rebbe brings the famous quote, I'll say it in Hebrew and I'll translate it, we're going to see koyach hapoyel benifel. In other words, when something is created, you don't see the creator, but when Mashiach comes, we're going to see the creator and everything that was created. So when you're going to see, for example, a mountain, you're not going to see the mountain. You're going to see Hashem in the mountain. You're going to see a wall, you're going to see Hashem in the wall. Whatever you're going to see the driving force, the real force behind its existence. And the Rebbe says, koyach hapoyel ben nifel, which means in nifel, the thing that exists, is referring to all seder hishtalshlus, on all levels, from the highest to the lowest. When you're going to open your eyes, what are you going to see? You're going to see literally Hashem and everything. And literally, even in this materialistic physical world, the lowest world, because we know there's Atzilut, where God is revealed, Bria less, Yitzira less, and obviously Asiyah, this world, Hashem is totally not revealed. We have to work hard to see Him. But when Mashiach comes, even in this world, Oilum Hasiyah, we're going to see Koyach HaPoyel B'Hanifel. And like the Rebbe brings, the way it's explained, the prayer that we say on high holidays, what does it say? V'yeda kol poel ki ata pe'altoi. Every person, everything that was created is going to know, not only see, we're going to know, we're going to know that you created us. What is that referring to? It's referring to literally this physical world. That even in this world, what's going to be revealed is Hashem. Now, how do we make that happen? So what happens as the preparation happens was by building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle, which was in the desert. And the same thing also, that was the Mishkan in the past. But the same thing also like building the Mishkan, which is in every one of our souls, internally. So when we build a Mishkan within our souls, we prepare the world that we will all see the Koyach HaPoyel B'Nifal. So now, obviously, if the Rebbe is saying is that there's the Mishkan of the past in the tabernacle, but we each have a Mishkan within us. And by building our Mishkan, we will see Hashem, God and godliness, the essence of Hashem and everything. So we need to know what that means practically. The Rebbe is going to explain beautifully, practically, what it means to build our Mishkan, to build our tabernacle within us, so that we can make ourselves and the world ready to see God and godliness and everything in the world. So Rebbe explains as follows when he says like this. Generally speaking, in the Mishkan, the physical Mishkan that existed, there were three components. Again, there was more, but generally speaking, there's three, which we're going to be speaking about in depth in this Chassidic discourse. And he says like this. What are the three components? Component number one, you had the Klei HaMishkan. You had the vessels of the Mishkan. That's component number one. Multiple vessels, but generally vessels. Then you had the Yeriyos. You had the curtains, the drapes in the Mishkan. Second type of component. The third component is the Karashim, the wooden posts that were around the Mishkan. Now, that's the, generally speaking, three things. The vessels, the curtains, and the posts. What does that mean practically in our serving Hashem? So the vessels of the Mishkan, which we know the highest and most powerful vessel in the Mishkan was what? The Ark. What does the Ark resemble? The Ark resembles Torah. So what we're saying is all the vessels resemble Torah, and specifically the Ark, which is the most important vessel in the Mishkan, resembles the idea of learning Torah. That's the vessels. So the vessels are connected to Torah. What is the drapes? What does that resemble? That resembles prayer, tefillah. What's the connection with drapes and prayer? Because we know that drapes are makif. You hang drapes around. And the prayer is also makif. It also encompasses us around us. Why? Because when a person prays, how do you pray? When someone prays and someone's really into praying, you see them like emotionally charged. In Hebrew, it's called a midos. The emotions are on fire. And midos are considered, it's a very powerful insight, to reference to midos here, that midos are considered makif, Now, even though generally midos is pnimi, it's your emotions, but when you're comparing, since we mentioned Torah, which is more intellect, and intellect we know is internal, so when it comes to midos, emotions in contrast to intellect, so midos are considered makif. And as in reference to Torah we know is more pnimius, more internal. How do we know Torah is more internal? Because when it says about Torah, it says, your Torah b'soich mei is within my innards, within my stomach. So you see, Torah is we take it in internally. Up to the point, when you learn Torah, how do you learn Torah? Just wow, ideas? No, you have to sit and you have to learn and you have to meditate, and literally it becomes one with you. So Torah is something which is more pnimius, it becomes one with you, and midos is something which is more external. So that is, so far again, the kalim, which is the Torah, is more connected to pnimius, and the drapes are more makif, which is basically the idea of the midos, which is connected to prayer. And the third thing is the post, the karashim, the wooden posts that were in the Mishkan, that resembles humility, standing with humility. So we have Torah, which is connected to the ark. You have prayer, which is connected to the drapes externally. And then you have the post, which is standing at attention, which is basically humility. What's the connection with humility? So the Rebbe brings the verse where it says in the Torah, it says, V'asisas akroshim, you should make the post, Atse shitim, made out of wood, cedar wood, oimdim, they're standing. What does standing mean? So the Rebbe says standing represents humility. What does that mean? You're standing strong on your position. Learning, you're using your intellect. Prayer, you're excited. Humility is respect, you're accepting whatever Hashem wants and has in store for you. So based on this, Rebbe explains why the Mishkan was specifically from Atze Shittim. They were made out of cedar wood, but they were oindim. They were standing, specifically they were standing. They weren't laying flat, but they were standing. Why? The Rebbe asked a simple question. What does oindim mean? It's standing. 1 second. We know that Judaism is all about moving. You don't want to be in the same spot. You want to be a mahalach. You want to be going. And as we know, the verse says clearly, V'nasati l'chai gave you mahalchim. Neshamas ha'mahalchim, where people that move, where there are people that grow, bein ha'oimdim, amongst the ones that are standing, which is referring to angels. And as explained in many, many places, that this is the power that the neshama has by coming down into this world, because before the neshama came down to the world, what does it say? Chai Hashem, Elokei Yisrael, shamanti lefanav. When the neshama was on high, it stood at attention. And amadati, it says specifically it stood at attention. But when the neshama comes down into this world, and it does its spiritual work, then it becomes a mahalach. Then it's a mover. That means it's elevating from one level to the next. But so if that's the case, if we are all about growth, if we are all about mahalchim, so why was the Mishkan made out of atzei shittim that are oimdim? Standing on one spot? What's the message here? We're supposed to be moving. And Rebbe says like this, if we're talking about angels we know they stand in the same spot. Why? Because it says clearly, Srafim, which is referring to the angels, Oimdim are standing, Mimaloi. And the Medrash says, actually, that one of the reasons why the Karashim are Oimdim, they're standing, is because they're actually compared to angels. So angels are standing. And again, the Medrash says that the Karashim, the posts, are called Oimdim because they're like angels. And obviously because angels are spiritual. And on a spiritual level, the avoid of the angels is to stand. Attention, whatever Hashem says. But on the other hand, the Mishkan we know is we're in this physical world. And in this physical world, you don't want to be stagnant. You don't want to be standing. You want to be moving. So if that's the case, why were the Krushim made out of Atzei Shittim that are Oindim, that are cedar wood that are standing? So the Rebbe explains here, and he says something very, very powerful. Powerful idea. Because the Torah is trying to teach us that the foundation, that's point number one, and the beginning of any service of Hashem has to be I'll say it in Hebrew and I'll translate it. Bittul betachlis. Totally humbled to Hashem. So again, the foundation and the beginning of serving Hashem, you want to enter into a relationship with Hashem, you have to show up, Hineni, I'm here. Hashem, you're the boss, what is needed? That's the way it starts. And if it doesn't start that way, you didn't start off right, go back and start again. So again, this is key. What the Rebbe is saying is that the beginning and the foundation of serving Hashem, showing up, you have to show up with humility. And on the contrary, that's why it says, Atze Shittim. See the wood that we're standing. Because even though, if you think about it, what's an eitz? What's wood? Wood comes from a tree. Trees grow. In its nature, a tree is growing, which is the opposite of standing in the same place. But our job is to affect within growth. They should stand and they should be humble to Hashem. So yes, even though we are by nature, we're growers, and we're gonna grow. But when starting, look at that tree. That tree was growing, but when it stood in the Mishkan, it stood at attention. The same thing also, you want to start a relation with Hashem? Humility. Hineni, here I am. And Rebbe says this component of humility that we find in the Mishkan, Atze Shittim Oindim, was standing at attention, was even more felt in the actual Beit HaMikdash. The Mishkan was a traveling tabernacle. But even in the ultimate Beit HaMikdash that was built in Yerushalayim HaKodesh. Why? Because the fact is, look at the Beit HaMikdash. How was it built? It was built from stone and it was built from earth. And the fact is, on a literal level, when you put a stone in a spot or earth, it's much more standing in one's place, and it represents more of a bittul. It's even a deeper humility and humbleness to Hashem. And as like the Rebbe says, explained many places based on the verse, Koires Batenu Arazim, that the walls of our house are strong, and they explain according to Chassidus that it's referring to the level of humility which was in the Beis HaMikdash much greater than the Mishkan. So the beginning of the avodah is humility. It's in the Mishkan and even stronger in the Beis HaMikdash. That's the way it starts. Once you come with bittul, once you come with humility, once you come with respect, and the Rebbe says, bittul muchlet. I mean, we're talking intense, real, pure, organic humility. Afterwards, sure, you have to start moving, you have to start elevating, you have to start growing, and then you go to the level of Urios. Urios is all about growth, emotions, charged. And we know that Urios are made out of not only tzoymeach, things that grow. The Urios are made out of actually the hide of animals that had much more life force. So based on this, the Rebbe explains why, when it comes to Bnei Merari, like we asked in the beginning of Chassidic Discourse, it doesn't say Nasa Yisreish, elevate the head. But by Bnei Gershon it says Nasa Yisreish, but it says Gamheim, also them, and who also like Bnei Kahas. So Nasa Yisreish, pure, that's Bnei Kahas, which what they resemble. Gamheim is Gershon. They have Nasa Yisreish, but only, so to speak, second class to Bnei Kahas. And Bnei Merari, there's no Nasa Yisreish. Why? And they're explained beautifully, and it sounds like this. What is the avodah of Bnei Merari? So if you think about the word, Merari comes from the mar. Mar comes from bitterness. And when someone's bitter, someone is remorseful, that brings to humility. So the avodah of Bnei Merari, even though they were complete, they had everything, but their main avodah was to be bitter. The avodah of Bnei Merari is what? Bittul. And because they were bittul, they represented humility. Therefore, what was the Bnei Merari's job in the Mishkan? Beautiful. What was their job? They're the ones that carry the krushim, the posts that were standing, the posts that were humble. So Bnei Merari represented humility. Their job was to deal with humility. So since they were all about humility, it doesn't say Nasa Yisreish, elevate their head. Okay, on the contrary, what was their job? What did they engage with? Humility. What kind of Nasa Yisreish? You don't have to elevate their head. They represent humility, which is the opposite of elevating the head. It would be a contradiction. So that's what B'nai Merari. So therefore, B'nai Merari, there's no Nasei Yisroish. Why? Because it's all about humility. And their job is humility. On the contrary, where does it say Nasei Yisroish? Exclusive by B'nai Kahas. What did B'nai Kahas deal with? They carried the ark. What was in the ark? The Torah. So therefore, it says Nasei Yisroish, elevate their head. Because where do you elevate your head? Where do you transform your mind on the greatest level? That's through Torah. When someone learns Torah, you can literally transform and elevate your head to the highest levels. So by B'nai Kahas, it says Nasei Yisroish, not a physical elevating the head. Learning Torah. When you learn Torah, that will elevate your head. And when it comes to B'nai Gershon, it says elevate, but Gamheim, also them. And there's Nasei Yisroish, who's the protege of elevating the head? That's Kahas, learning Torah. Nasei Yisroish of Gershon is connected to them. Why? In other words, they're second class of B'nai Kahas in reference to elevating the head. Why? Because what was the spiritual work of Gershon? Prayer. And when it comes to prayer, so prayer on its own, you don't elevate your head by prayer. Prayer, you come with humility. But nevertheless, what happens after you pray? After you pray and you get connected to Hashem, then you go learn Torah. So in other words, the elevating of the head in prayer is only because it's going to bring you afterwards to learning Torah. And as we know, it says, Tfilasi smuch lemitasi, that your prayer is close to your bed. Therefore, you have also the idea of some component of Nasei Yisroish. So based on this, Rebbe explains, this way it was in the Mishkan. Torah, elevate the head. Tefillah, half and half. And then humility. And there it says, this is basically what our spiritual work is every single day. Here you have your mission statement. Here you have your to-do list, how you should behave and how you should run your day every single day. What's our avoid every day? The way we start our day is bittul. We start our day, hineni. Hashem, what do you need from me? I'm ready to accept whatever you need me to do. The level of what? B'nai Merari. Standing straight, hineni. And guess what? You start that way, you're in the door. Then, what do you do after you're ready? Then you pray. The avoid of B'nai Gershon. And when you finish praying, then you come to the level of what? Learning Torah, the avoid of B'nai Kahas. And the Rebbe explains, by doing this spiritual work, starting off with humility, and then praying, and then learning Torah, and we do this Bemidbar ha'amim, which is a quote from the prophets, in the desert, the physical desert and the spiritual desert, and there's specifically in the time of exile, time of Galus, and specifically in this last exile, and specifically the Rebbe says, after the previous Rebbe announced and made a proclamation, la'alter l'geula, that we have to get ready for the redemption. And he even took it a step further. He said, V'imdu hachein kulchem, let's all stand ready for Mashiach to come. By doing our spiritual work, humility, prayer, and Torah study, we will come to the tremendous revelation what's going to be like when Mashiach comes. Which, as we said, we quoted the verse in the beginning of the Chassidic Discourse from Prophet Isaiah. V'hayu einecha royois asmeirecha, that our eyes are going to see in everything Hashem. And the Rebbe says, and this is actually interesting, it's actually appropriate right now, because right now we just celebrated Shavuos, we just celebrated Matan Torah. And the Rebbe said this Discourse with Shabbos after Matan Torah, because the Rebbe says, and what happened in Matan Torah, when Hashem gave the Torah? Hashem revealed himself. And the revelation that took place in Matan Torah is on par and compared to the level what's going to be like when Mashiach comes. And since we are reliving these days now, and we're talking about it, we're remembering it, so the Rebbe says, therefore, since we just experienced Matan Torah, so this year we were able to draw in the tremendous revelation of Matan Torah, not past, but literally in this year. And from here we have the power and the strength that this is how it's going to be when Mashiach comes. And especially when we add in our spiritual work, in our spiritual desert, in the three areas, again, humble, humility, bittul, tefillah, prayer, Torah study, and specifically The Rebbe takes it up a notch and he says, by learning Pnimius HaTorah, by learning Chassidus. Right now, we're learning Chassidus, we're learning Kabbalah, we're learning Pnimius HaTorah. What's the power of Pnimius HaTorah? Because we know when it comes to Pnimius HaTorah Chassidus, in Nigla, there's a question back and forth, and an answer, an argument, etc. In Pnimius HaTorah, there's no questions, there's no answers, there's no arguments. It's just seeing Hashem and godliness. And like it's brought down, the Alter brings in Tanya, in Geras HaKodesh, and he brings over there what it says in the Zohar, that with this book of Zohar and Chassidus and Kabbalah, etc., we are going to go out of Galus Berachamim, with compassion of Hashem, and we're going to have the ultimate redemption with peace, but true peace, in a way that there's not going to be room for any arguments, any war. And like the Rebbe brings from the Chassidic Discourse of Pada B'Shalom, redeem my soul in peace, of the Mittler Rebbe, and he explains over there, Pada B'Shalom, give me peace, I want to have real peace. And he says, the Mittler Rebbe says, that the true peace is going to be when Mashiach comes. Why? Because right now, unfortunately, there's a lot of impurity in the world. When Mashiach comes, the impurity is going to go away. Ruach HaTuma Avir Min Haaretz. Hashem is going to take away the impurity from the world. And we're all going to go to the Holy Land. And in a way, not only go to the Holy Land, Yarchiv Hashem Elokechas Gvulcha, the verse says Hashem is going to expand the boundaries. And we're going to go to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, Ir HaKodesh, the holy city. And like it says in the verse, or Chava, Hashem is going to expand the boundaries. And when is it going to happen? The Rebbe says clearly, take it from Yad Mamish. It's going to happen right away. And Hashem is not going to hold us back even like the blink of an eye. And we're going to have the Geula, Ha'amitis V'Hashlema, the redemption, the complete redemption, and the true redemption. It's a short Chassidic discourse, but it's a very, very powerful Chassidic discourse, because the Rebbe is showing us how we can literally experience today. We can see godliness in our lives. 3-step process: humility, prayer, and Torah study. And let's hope and pray that we all practice our humility, our prayer, our Torah study. We're going to see the greatest revelation with Mashiach Tzidkenu B'mheira V'yameinu Mamash. And hopefully, God willing, our next class will be in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.